In the heart of Sweden, hidden in plain sight, there exists a family that controls industries worth hundreds of billions of dollars. They shape the technology you use, the medicines you take, and the cars you drive. Yet, you've probably never heard their name. No flashy Forbes lists, no tabloid scandals, no luxury yachts plastered across Instagram. For over 170 years, the Wallenberg family has mastered something that the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and even modern tech billionaires haven't quite perfected: the art of invisible power. They've survived economic depressions, 2 world wars, and the rise and fall of empires. But here's where the story gets dark. During World War II, while millions suffered under Nazi tyranny, the Wallenbergs played both sides. They helped Jewish refugees escape certain death, yes, but they also bankrolled Hitler's war machine. How does one family maintain such power for 6 generations without ever appearing on a single rich list? How did they navigate the moral abyss of World War II and emerge stronger than ever? And most importantly, what does it mean that this family still controls much of Europe's economy today? This is the story of the Wallenbergs, the most powerful family you've never heard of. Let's rewind to 1856. Sweden isn't the economic powerhouse we know today. Think of a country rich in natural resources, iron ore, timber, water power, but painfully short on the one thing that could unlock all that potential: capital. For everyday Swedes, getting a loan was nearly impossible. There was only one game in town: the central bank, Riksbanken. And they weren't in the business of taking risks on ordinary people or small businesses. The Swedish economy was stuck in neutral, watching other European nations race ahead during the Industrial Revolution. Enter André Oscar Wallenberg. He was a young Swedish naval officer who had just returned from a transformative journey to the United States. While Americans might take it for granted today, André was astounded by what he saw in America: a banking system that actually worked for regular people, banks that competed with each other, banks that took calculated risks, banks that fueled innovation and enterprise. On that voyage back to Sweden, André read a book that would change Swedish history forever: How to Start a Bank. I know, it doesn't sound like the most riveting beach read, but for André it was nothing short of revolutionary. He devoured every page, and by the time his ship docked in Stockholm, he had a plan. In Invisibility, André founded Stockholm's Enskilda Bank, or SEB for short, Sweden's very first private bank. Now, to Americans, this might not seem groundbreaking, but in mid-19th century Sweden, this was radical. André's model was inspired by Scottish banking practices: pool the small savings of ordinary citizens and use that capital to fund industrial projects and business ventures. The concept was simple but powerful: get money circulating through the economy, and Sweden would grow, and grow it did. SEB became the financial engine that powered Sweden's rapid industrialization. Suddenly entrepreneurs could get loans, factories could expand, railroads could be built. But André knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone with the vision and ruthlessness to take SEB global. That person was his son, Knut Agathon Wallenberg. Knut didn't just maintain his father's legacy, he transformed it. Under his leadership, SEB expanded internationally, building relationships with financial institutions across Europe and America. The Wallenberg Bank was no longer just Swedish. It was becoming a European powerhouse. The family fortune grew exponentially. Now here's where the Wallenbergs made a decision that would secure their dynasty for generations to come. In 1916, Swedish lawmakers passed a regulation limiting how much industrial equity banks could hold. For most banking families, this would have been a disaster. But for the Wallenbergs, it was an opportunity. They created something called Investibility, essentially a holding company that could own shares in industrial corporations without the restrictions that apply to banks. This single move allowed the Wallenbergs to maintain control over Sweden's most important companies while appearing to comply with the new regulations. But the real genius came from Knut and his wife Alice. They had no children, and they faced a choice that many wealthy families face: what happens to all this wealth when we're gone? In 1917, they established the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation. Now, this wasn't just about charity or legacy, it was a strategic masterstroke. By placing their wealth in a foundation, they accomplished several things simultaneously. First, the money would never be dispersed among distant relatives and diluted over time, the curse of the third generation that destroys most family fortunes. Second, the foundation would fund scientific research, technology, and medicine, ensuring Sweden's competitiveness in the Wallenberg sphere's continued relevance. Third, and perhaps most importantly, foundations in Sweden enjoy significant tax advantages and privacy protections. This is crucial for understanding how the Wallenbergs operate today. When you look at Sweden's rich lists, you won't find the Wallenberg name. That's not because they're not wealthy, it's because most of their wealth is locked in foundations. It's a brilliant form of financial invisibility. When Knut decided to leave his entire fortune to the foundation rather than to his half-brother Marcus felt betrayed. He had worked tirelessly to grow the family empire, and he expected to inherit everything. But Knut saw further ahead. He understood that without the foundation structure, the Wallenberg fortune would eventually be divided, diluted, and dissolved. Marcus was angry at first, but as the decades rolled on, he came to understand the wisdom of Canute's decision. The foundation system became the family's greatest asset, their financial fortress. Marcus Wallenberg Sr. was different from his predecessors. He had no interest in luxury or ostentation. In fact, he was known for wearing the same jacket for years, literally flipping it inside out when the fabric wore thin so he could get more use out of it. He didn't even have pockets sewn into his jackets, perhaps to avoid the temptation of carrying anything that might distract him from work. Marcus was, by all accounts, a workaholic. His singular focus was building the Wallenberg industrial empire, and build he did. Under his guidance, the family became deeply involved in some of Sweden's most important companies. ASEA, which eventually became ABB, one of the world's largest engineering companies. Norsk Hydro, a Norwegian aluminum and renewable energy company. Atlas Diesel, which became Atlas Copco, a leading industrial equipment manufacturer. Skåne Vabis, which is now part of the Volkswagen Group. Stora Kopparberg, now Stora Enso, one of the world's largest paper and forest products companies. After World War I, Europe was in chaos. Economies were shattered. Borders were redrawn. Old empires had collapsed. In this environment, Marcus became Europe's go-to negotiator and arbitrator for complex financial and industrial disputes. His reputation for fairness and his deep connections made him indispensable. But Marcus's greatest test and the greatest moral challenge in Wallenberg history was yet to come. World War II was on the horizon, and the family would soon face choices that would haunt them for generations. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Sweden declared neutrality. For a small Nordic nation caught between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, neutrality seemed like the only path to survival. But neutrality, in practice, meant something very different for the Wallenbergs than it meant in theory. Marcus Wallenberg Sr. had two sons who would carry the family into the war years, Jacob Wallenberg and Marcus Wallenberg Jr., known as Dode. These brothers would literally divide the world between them. Jacob became Sweden's chief trade representative to Nazi Germany. Dode, meanwhile, worked with the Allies, particularly Britain and the United States. On paper, Sweden was neutral, but the Wallenbergs were doing business with everyone. This is where things get complicated and dark. SEB, the bank founded by Andre Oskar Wallenberg nearly a century earlier, became one of the financial institutions that cooperated with Nazi Germany. According to historical records and investigations conducted after the war, SEB allegedly helped to launder assets looted from occupied territories, including assets seized from Jewish victims of the Holocaust. Think about what this means. As Jewish families across Europe were being stripped of their property, their businesses, their life savings before being shipped to concentration camps, some of those assets flowed through Swedish banks, including SEB. The Wallenbergs facilitated trade between Sweden and Nazi Germany, providing the Third Reich with crucial materials like iron ore and ball bearings that kept the German war machine running. For American viewers, it's important to understand the moral complexity here. Sweden was surrounded by Nazi-occupied territory. One wrong move could mean invasion. The Swedish government walked a tightrope, trying to maintain sovereignty while avoiding German aggression. The Wallenbergs, as Sweden's most powerful business family, were at the center of this impossible balancing act. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. While Jacob Wallenberg was facilitating trade with Nazi Germany, he was also secretly working with the German resistance movement, attempting to overthrow Hitler. The German resistance, led by figures like Karl Gordler, desperately needed outside support to overthrow the Nazi regime. They needed assurances from Britain and the United States that a post-Hitler Germany would be treated fairly, and they needed someone to carry those messages. That someone was Jacob Wallenberg. In 1943, Jacob met with Karl Gordler in Berlin. It would be his last trip to the German capital during the war. Why? Because his involvement with the resistance had been exposed. Returning to Germany would have been a death sentence. The resistance's most ambitious plan came on July 20, 1944, the famous plot to assassinate Hitler with a bomb hidden in a briefcase during a military briefing. Jacob was supposed to meet a messenger in Stockholm with news of the coup's success. But as we all know from history, the plot failed. The bomb exploded, but Hitler survived. The messenger was caught, tortured, and executed. Gordler met the same fate shortly after. So here's the paradox. The Wallenbergs were simultaneously profiting from Nazi Germany and working to destroy it. They were facilitating the looting of Jewish assets while one family member was risking everything to save Jewish lives. Which brings us to perhaps the most heroic figure in Wallenberg history. While Jacob Wallenberg navigated the treacherous waters of international diplomacy and resistance plots, his nephew Raoul Wallenberg was on a very different mission, one that would make him one of the great heroes of the 20th century. In 1944, Hungary's 700,000 Jews became Nazi Germany's next target. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, personally oversaw the deportations to Auschwitz. Trainloads of Hungarian Jews were being shipped to the gas chambers every single day. It was genocide at an industrial scale. The Swedish government, under pressure from the United States and Jewish organizations, decided to send a diplomat to Budapest with an extraordinary mission: save as many Jews as possible. They chose Raoul Wallenberg, a 32-year-old businessman from the Wallenberg family who had connections, courage, and a willingness to take enormous risks. What Raoul did in Budapest was nothing short of miraculous. He designed and distributed thousands of Swedish protective passports, passes that declared the bearers to be under Swedish protection. These documents had no legal standing whatsoever. They were, essentially, very official-looking forgeries. But Raoul presented them with such confidence and authority that Nazi officials often accepted them. He literally pulled people off trains bound for Auschwitz. He climbed onto the roofs of cattle cars and handed protective passes through the slats to prisoners inside. When the Nazis organized death marches of Jews from Budapest to Austria, Raoul followed the columns in his car, handing out passes and demanding the release of anyone who could claim Swedish protection. In the final days of the war, when the Nazis prepared to liquidate the Budapest ghetto where 70,000 Jews were trapped, Raoul personally confronted the commanding German general. He threatened him with prosecution for war crimes if the massacre proceeded. Somehow, miraculously, the general backed down. 70,000 lives were saved. Historians estimate that Raoul Wallenberg personally saved between 60,000 and 100,000 Jewish lives. For context, Oskar Schindler, whose story was famously told in Schindler's List, saved about 1,200 people. Raoul saved tens of thousands. He was fearless, resourceful, and utterly committed to his mission. He should have come home a hero. Instead, he disappeared into the Soviet Gulag system and was never seen again. His story is one of the great tragic mysteries of the 20th century. When American troops entered Stuttgart, Germany in 1945, they discovered something that would haunt the Wallenberg family for decades. Hidden in a vault were documents revealing that Seb had maintained what investigators called a dummy relationship with Bosch, the major German industrial conglomerate. The arrangement allowed Bosch to hide assets and evade scrutiny. The revelation was explosive. U.S. Treasury officials placed Jacob and Marcus Wallenberg on a blacklist, designating them as special blocked nationals, essentially financial pariahs suspected of helping the Nazis hide wealth. For a family that had built its reputation on discretion and respectability, this was devastating. Back in Sweden, questions began to swirl. What exactly had the Wallenbergs done during the war? How deep did their collaboration with Nazi Germany go? The family had always operated behind the scenes, but now that invisibility looked more like concealment. And then there was the tragedy of Raoul. In January 1945, shortly after saving the Budapest ghetto, Raoul was summoned to meet with Soviet military authorities. He was never seen again. The Soviets claimed he was a spy. For decades, they denied any knowledge of his fate. Then, in the 1950s, they released a document claiming Raoul had died of a heart attack in 1947 in Lubyanka prison. He would have been only 35 years old. But here's what makes this even more heartbreaking and morally complex. While Raoul languished in Soviet captivity, the Wallenberg family was actively pursuing business deals with the Soviet Union. In the late 1940s, they were planning to loan Stalin's regime $250 million, a staggering sum equivalent to billions today. The question that haunts historians is this: could the Wallenbergs have used their leverage, their business relationships, their influence to pressure the Soviets to release Raoul? Did they even try, or was the potential loss of a lucrative business deal more important than the life of a family member who had saved 100,000 people? We may never know the full answer. What we do know is that the Swedish government barely protested. They made quiet diplomatic inquiries, but they never pushed hard. The man who saved tens of thousands of lives was abandoned by the very people who could have saved him. It's a stain on both the Wallenberg family and the Swedish government that has never been fully washed away. After the war, the Wallenbergs faced a choice: retreat from the spotlight and manage their existing wealth, or rebuild their empire even bigger and stronger than before. They chose the latter. Marcus Dode Wallenberg Jr. took the reins and transformed the family business for the modern era. He was hands-on in a way that few modern billionaires are. He restructured Atlas Diesel into Atlas Copco, a global industrial leader. He played a crucial role in developing Sweden's Saab fighter jets, ensuring Sweden's military independence during the Cold War. He navigated the delicate balance of doing business with both the Eastern Bloc and the Western powers. For 5 decades, from the 1930s until his death in 1982, Marcus was at the center of nearly every major Swedish business decision. But all that power came at a price, and the pressure was immense. Marcus had 2 sons, Mark Wallenberg and Peter Wallenberg. Mark was the chosen heir. From childhood, he was groomed for leadership. His education, his career path, every step was designed to prepare him to take over the family empire. Mark worked tirelessly. He helped merge 2 major Swedish banks to create the modern SEB. He was brilliant, dedicated, and desperate to live up to the Wallenberg name. But the pressure was crushing. The expectations were impossible. The weight of nearly 120 years of family legacy bore down on his shoulders every single day. In 1971, at just 47 years old, Mark Wallenberg took his own life. It was a tragedy that shook the family to its core and revealed the human cost of maintaining such power across generations. Suddenly, the family's future fell to Mark's younger brother, Peter Wallenberg, a man who had deliberately chosen a different path. Working his way up from the ground floor at Atlas Copco in Africa, far from Stockholm's expectations. Nobody thought Peter was the right choice. He had a strained relationship with his father. He wasn't the anointed successor, but Peter proved everyone wrong. He took over in 1982 and not only maintained the empire but expanded it globally, secured the family's stakes in key companies, and launched Patricio Industries, which became a crucial part of Investor AB. He transformed doubt into legacy. So where does the Wallenberg empire stand today? The numbers are staggering. According to the Financial Times, the Wallenberg business empire is valued at approximately 250 billion euros. That's about $270 billion US dollars. To put that in perspective, that's comparable to Elon Musk's net worth at its peak. But here's the key difference. You'll never see the Wallenbergs on any rich list. You won't find them in Forbes or Bloomberg. That's because most of their wealth is held in foundations specifically. The Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation and related entities. These foundations hold more than $30 billion in assets directly and control major stakes in publicly listed companies worth over $660 billion. The current generation, Jacob Wallenberg, Peter Wallenberg Jr., and Marcus Wallenberg, are in their late 60s and early 70s. They still run the empire, and they've already prepared the sixth generation to take over. Their portfolio reads like a who's who of European industry. AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical giant that became a household name during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ericsson, the telecommunications company that's building 5G networks around the world. ABV, one of the world's largest engineering companies. Saab, the defense and aerospace manufacturer. Atlas Copco, Electrolux, and dozens of other companies that touch your life every day. Swedish historian Gunnar Wetterberg, who has written extensively about the Wallenbergs, puts it bluntly. Every government in Sweden, whether left or right, knows they must work with the Wallenbergs. It's what's best for Sweden. Think about that. In the United States, we have antitrust laws, corporate governance reforms, and at least the appearance of competitive markets. But in Sweden, one family controls approximately 40% of the stock market's total value. They're essentially the Swedish economy. The family motto, written in Latin, is "Si non videre," to be, not to seem. They don't seek attention. They rarely give interviews. When they do speak publicly, it's always about their businesses or their philanthropic foundations, never about politics or personal wealth. The Financial Times has called them kingmakers. Another publication described them as the best paid charity workers in the world. The combination of immense economic power and philanthropic giving makes them essentially untouchable. Because if you go after the Wallenbergs, you're not just challenging a family or challenging Sweden itself, and very few would dare do that. They've perfected something that most billionaires struggle with: intergenerational wealth transfer. There's a saying in business: shirt sleeves 2 shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The founder builds the fortune, the children maintain it, and the grandchildren squander it. But the Wallenbergs are now in their 6th generation, and they're richer and more powerful than ever. So what do we make of the Wallenbergs? They're undeniably brilliant. They've built and maintained an empire across 6 generations in an era where most family fortunes do until last 3. They've mastered the art of invisibility in an age of celebrity billionaires. They've funded scientific research that has advanced medicine, technology, and innovation. But they're also deeply troubling. Their collaboration with Nazi Germany facilitating the laundering of looted assets, helping the Third Reich hide wealth, is a moral stain that can never be fully washed away. The fact that they profited from some of history as worst atrocities while one of their own was saving lives creates a paradox that is hard to reconcile. And then there's Raoul, the hero who saved 100,000 lives and was abandoned by his own family and government when he needed them most. His disappearance into the Soviet Gulag while the Wallenbergs pursued business deals with Stalin is one of the great moral failures of the 20th century. Today, the Wallenbergs control companies that employ hundreds of thousands of people and generate hundreds of billions in revenue. They shape European technology, defense, pharmaceuticals, and industry. They are, in many ways, the invisible hand behind the European economy. The question we're left with is this: should this much power be concentrated in one family? Should democracies allow dynasties to control such vast swaths of their economies? And can philanthropy and scientific funding justify a legacy built, in part, on some of history's darkest moments? I don't have easy answers to those questions. What I do know is that the Wallenberg story of wealth, power, secrecy, heroism, and moral compromise tells us something profound about how power really works in the modern world. The most powerful people aren't always the ones you see on magazine covers. Sometimes, the real power is invisible. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Drop a $sign in the comments to show you made it to the end. And check out my video on the Rockefeller family and other dynasty that shaped the modern world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.